It's time. I can't put it off any longer. I must face my destiny. Naturally, I'm talking about this. I mean, what else could I mean? And there really is no point having spent all those hours constructing this mostly by hand if I never actually put it in an armhole. So that's what we're going to do today. And by the end, the jacket will actually be structurally complete. So stick around for that. It's going to be fiddly. It's going to be tough. And probably I'm going to cry. But isn't that true of all the best things in life? Let's get on with it. Let's just jump right in, shall we? Don't want to prolong the inevitable. So here's my armhole with my rather chaotic amount of mark stitching. And here is my sleeve. First thing I want to do is just match up this point, which is the front pitch point of the sleeve. When I talk about pitch, it's all to do with the way that the sleeve is hanging, the angle that it's hanging, so that when my arm is in it, it will lie smooth, it will hang smooth and match the angle at which my arm naturally lies. I decided not to go into too much detail about it in the videos itself because it's just a massive headache and I was working a lot of it out on the fly. But basically I've calculated that these points correspond to where certain points on the sleeve need to align in order for this angle to be achieved. Anyway, so to start with, if you're thinking that's how it's gonna lie on, so this is like the front of the sleeve, and there's a little notch just here, and that is gonna match up to this point. And I'm just gonna begin by basting the sleeve from that point just around the underside of the armhole before I carry on. One thing to say about the armhole is it's been reinforced with a cross-grained strip of pocketing that I've just basted around, and that's covered basically more or less the whole length of the armhole except for this sort of 5 or 6 centimeters under the armpit there. And I'm trying to base just outside of where my actual seam is gonna go. So my seam allowance is 1 centimeter, so I'm just doing sort of 1 and a bit centimeters. And if you don't know, or if you've never done this before, the sleeve situation on a suit jacket is a little bit particular because the sleeve itself, as I may have mentioned in the last episode, is actually longer around the armhole bit than the actual armhole of the jacket itself. A rule of thumb is about 10% longer than the length, although it can vary with style, and generally that pans out to about 5 centimeters, 2 inches. And the reason why it is longer than the armhole itself is so that the arm has more freedom of movement. Because again, as we've seen, as I've talked about a lot over the course of making this, we want the armhole itself to be quite high up, we want it to be quite tight to the body, but so that the arm can still have the maximum amount of range basically in terms of how it can move. We want an excess amount of fabric in the sleeve itself. And this is a great solution. It means that we can have those sort of high armholes, that nice fittedness around the torso itself without sacrificing flexibility and comfort and movement and stuff. The only problem is it's very fiddly to sew because I have to distribute by hand by basting all of that ease around the armhole so there's no ripples or puckering or anything like that, and I have to do that before I even think about machine stitching it. So what I've just done there is based around the one part of the sleeve armhole combination that doesn't actually need any of this ease, which is from this front pitch point and this front notch just around to the middle of the sort of armpit area. That's going to anchor everything. So having just done that first bit, I'm now going to turn everything inside out, and the fun is really going to begin. First though, I mean, full disclosure, I've already done the left sleeve, so I'm currently doing the right sleeve today. I fully finished that. You can see it's got this kind of bulbous quality around the edge. I mean, there's a few things going on there, a few reasons why, but the main thing is, again, that the sleeve itself is longer than the armhole into which it has to fit. And I did actually a pretty crummy job with this one. I think just about managed to rescue it. I'm going to try and be a little bit more, conscientious about this one today. Anyhow, okay, so if you think you're having a hard time orienting yourself, just think how I feel. But yeah, I've got these 3 cardinal points lined up now, and one is this one at the top of the sleeve cap. It's going to correspond to my shoulder seam, and this is the back seam of the sleeve itself, and that is corresponding to this point just at the back of the armhole here. I've just worked out that these are the points where if I meet these 3 points together between the armhole and the sleeve should fall at the right angle, and then the only job I then have left is to distribute the rest of the ease in such a way that the top of the sleeve will be smooth and there'll be no puckering, no ripples, things like that. That will be the difficult part, and we will get to it right away. So here's how it's going down. As you can see there, I've already done a few stitches. I'm currently working around the back of the armhole, going sort of anti-clockwise. And yeah, you can see there's these little ripples there between these stitches that are about somewhere between 0.5 and 1 centimeter long. And again, just a bit in from where the actual machine stitch is gonna be. And so as I based, basically, so I'm taking my stitches of the appropriate length. And as I go to take the next one, I just push the fabric along with my thumb and I'm piercing in between that bubble of ease that I've created, keeping that bubble alive as I push through the other side and coming out like that. And yeah, I'm just going to keep doing that and hope that by the time I get to my first sort of cardinal point, which is the, again, that back pitch point where I put that pin, that I will have reasonably evenly distributed this ease. It's quite normal for this to require a couple of goes to get right. This isn't actually the way I normally do it. I'm trying to do it the proper way for everyone else's benefit, and indeed my own, because obviously if I do it right, then I should get it right. But normally I take a bit of a shortcut route in how I stitch this, but you know, I'd like to achieve a proper result this time. Let's see if I can. I'm trying to just really not be too greedy with these bubbles of ease that you're putting in, because you know, you don't want to create puckers. You don't want to create big ripples. I mean, there are little ripples here, but I'm trying to leave enough space that I press those out in a little while. And yeah, I think, let's see, I might be okay. Just coming up to that first point there, we'll see. So there are kind of different approaches basically to how and where you distribute how much of this ease. You can do it so that you have basically a little bit around the front of the armhole, a lot around the top, and then whatever's left basically around the bit I've just done, sort of going around the back of the armhole towards the armpit. In my case, with the first sleeve that I did, I basically just distributed the ease as evenly as I could, and part of the reason why is because I actually have a bit more maybe than that sort of 5 centimeters, 10% going on. I think it was more like 6, maybe even 6.5 centimeters. In theory, if I can distribute it correctly, this will be, you know, can be a good thing, because it means I'll have even more, you know, just sort of flexibility and sort of comfort around the top of the arm, around the top of the sleeve when I'm wearing the jacket. The only problem is it means that there's even more fabric to try and neatly spread around this armhole without causing any puckering, and yeah, I mean, I'll bother. And as I already found with the first one, that was a bit of a struggle, but we'll see. We're coming around to the home straight now, the front top and the front of the sleeve. And so far the ease seems to have been tucking itself away relatively unproblematically. I mean, it will remains to be seen in a second when I check how it's hanging, how it's looking at the top with those puckers and stuff. I mean, there's every chance there will be some visible puckering because of, you know, the fact that, well, there's puckers, there's ease, and what's going to happen is I'm going to try and press that away. The process that I'm using here is going to be a sort of 2-stitch process. So I'm going to do this based, and then all being well, I will basically lock in the basting that I've done with another basting stitch. And if you see, there's obviously like relatively even gaps between where I've stitched and where these bubbles are. Once I've checked it and I'm happy that I've distributed these correctly or adequately, I will then do another stitch just inside of this one and basically fill in the gaps, and that will just help lock these bubbles of ease in to the place that I've put them. And at that point, I'll be ready to go to the ironing board and press it all out, hopefully. Okay, so hopefully, in theory, I've now basted that in place. I've set that sleeve in place. I'm just gonna check how it's hanging from the outside. So yeah, you can see there's sort of puckering and pulling a little bit. So I've also just gone and actually tried it on to see how the pitch is. In theory, the pitch is okay, but I think as you can see here, just around that back point, so again, this is the back seam of the sleeve, and that was that back pitch point here. It's just a little bit too crumpled, and it's also a bit too, a lot of these eases are a bit too unevenly distributed towards that point, and I'd rather have it a bit pushed up more towards the crown of the sleeve. I'm just gonna try and redo this stretch from that back pitch point, or just below it maybe, up to the shoulder point, and yeah, hopefully that will even it out a little bit. Again, it's just one of those processes where you have to try and be patient and accept that you are kind of doing this by eye and by feel, and it can easily be that intuitions aren't quite correct and that you need a little bit of time to warm up, achieve the desired result, which is definitely worth the effort, because you know, when you actually do get the sleeve in and it's falling right and it's hanging as it should, and there's a nice curve around the top of the sleeve, then you will be glad you put in all this time and effort. I'm not entirely sure I've improved anything here though. I feel like I've just repeated what I've just done, but we'll see. Well folks, I honestly can't remember what the last thing I said I was going to do was, because it's been, I don't know, like an hour or something since I last pressed record. I've had a bit of a nightmare rejigging this. Is the right sleeve? Yeah. For whatever reason, it turned out some of my pitch points weren't actually correct, although they seem to have worked pretty well for the other sleeve. Who knows what's going on there? Maybe I just actually did shift them on the other sleeve, and anyway, just moving around a little bit. You can see there, then mainly around the crown of the sleeve, that there's still a decent amount of rippling. I'm going to try not to worry too much about that, because that should come away in the pressing, and then also, I mean, we're going to have this sleeve head in here which is going to fill out some of this space and just generally make that a little bit less egregious, I hope. As I said, this is, you know, it's been a pretty rough hour, the last hour. Just about the least fun you can have while sewing, but try not to be too dramatic about it. So let's see what I'm going to do next. So as I said before, I've got here these are the stitches that I've just done that are placing the ease around the sleeve, and now I'm just like locking it in, just stitching in the gaps, basically. That makes sense. And that's just gonna help, while I press it, make sure that the ease and where I've placed it is not gonna shift too much other than to sort of shrink away. Because I don't want it moving around this relatively loose seam that I've sort of hand basted. I just want it to be where I've put it. Lord knows it took me long enough to get it there, so it had better not misbehave. As I said, I had wanted just to distribute it fully evenly around the whole distribution zone, if that makes sense. It has ended up more concentrated towards the top. I mean, that's fine. The main thing is for me was that each sleeve sort of looks like the other one. So where the previous stitch went over, I'm going under and then coming over where the previous stitch went under, if that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I really look forward to the day, the beautiful day in the future, should it ever come, where I no longer feel like I have to fear this step. This actually being perhaps the most strenuous, I think, because the sleeve is so much bigger than the armhole. But every time I've done it, it has just given me such a headache. But you know, I'm pretty pleased with how the other sleeve turned out already, so I know at least that it is possible. Well, at least there've been no tears yet. So that ease is now fixed in the place that I'd set it. You can see there's rippling. That is to be expected. Any really sharp puckers you don't really want. I think I'm just about in the clear now for the 8th moment of truth of this episode. Let's go. So this is the same effect that we've seen before with things like the shoulder sleeve itself, the shoulder seam itself, where we've hand distributed ease into a seam and then we're just gonna try and press out, not the ease itself, we want the ease, but just these ripples and just try and reduce that rippling effect around where the seam is actually gonna go itself. So really just going in a couple of centimeters or so and using lots of steam, not quite so hot, just going around and trying to press away those ripples. Again, depending on the fabric you're using, this will work better or less well. I know that this fabric isn't exactly the most steam amenable one, but it's not totally unworkable. So I'm just gonna go at it for a little while and hopefully make some progress on those ripples. And really just doing this around the whole length of the sleeve where I have put in any of that ease whatsoever. And again, you don't want to go too far in because, you know, assuming that this is working, the ease, the extra fabric is around that top bit of the sleeve, just beyond where you've stitched. You don't want to shrink anything there. That's exactly where you want there to be that excess. But you just want to eliminate any of the ripples because that's too much excess, basically. Yeah, I don't know if you've done this. Does the technique that I've followed match what you usually do, or do you have a different way of basting, or indeed approaching the setting altogether? Let's see how we're doing here. Yeah, I mean, I've sort of brutalized the fabric a little bit, to be honest. So you can see there's still a little bit. Maybe I'll give it a further press, but I think you can see already that has actually yielded some results. I am quite certain that my pressing technique leaves a great deal to be desired. So, you know, I mean, I like to think I've always been pretty clear about how unprofessional I am, just to say how amateurish. But if there were any doubt, I hope I've dispelled that in this last sort of 5-10 minutes or so. Okay. You know, I can't help but feel like this is a bit of a crossroads for me, you know, morally, technically, aesthetically, because I think it's pretty clear that this sleeve has not really been successfully set. I mean, we'll see. I think probably once the sleeve heads in, things will look a little bit less distressing and distressed. But as ever, you just have to try and meet your own personal standards, don't you? It's definitely true that I could be happier with the setting of the sleeve. I think I probably bit off more than I could chew by allowing the sleeve to remain more than just those sort of 5 centimeters longer than the armhole. I think I thought, well, let's see what happens if I try and include that extra ease, see if I can manage that and just have that more flexibility. And again, you know, in the other sleeve, I think more or less got it, although there's still 1 or 2 puckers there. It's just come to the point where at the end of the day, when I'm wearing this, am I gonna worry so much if there are some tiny little puckers here? You know, I can always pretend it was intentional. This is the thing. I have, you know, relative to my own standards, put a lot of more time in trying to get this bang on correct than I would normally do. Again, the other sleeve I sort of did in 1.5 goes. I think when it comes to the point where you're just making yourself miserable trying to get it absolutely perfect, maybe it's time to step back a little bit. But yeah, it's now time to just sew this around, so it will be just sort of inside where these basting stitches have gone. Yeah, and just to clarify, because I don't think I actually mentioned at any point, so both now and before with the basting, I've only been joining the garment fabric and the garment fabric of the sleeve and the jacket itself. So I'm not stitching through the canvas, none of that. I'm not stitching, obviously not stitching through the lining, not stitching through the shoulder pad, anything like that. It really is just garment fabric to garment fabric here. All these other weird and wonderful layers will get secured in their own way in the next steps. But this is just garment fabric to garment fabric here. Yeah, and so, you know, once I've stitched this, I'll unpick the basting, and, you know, it will either kind of work to a tolerable degree or it won't. And if it hasn't, then unpick, start again, basically. Don't know what to tell you. Folks, pray for me. Ooh. Again, the basting stitches were nearer to the outside than the machine stitches, so there's not really much to see until I unpick the basting stitchings. So off we go. Well, it's also not the most circular looking seam I've ever seen in my life. Again, I think I'm used to making the kind of internal compromises by now that will probably see me putting up with whatever inadequacies this has to present once I turn it inside out. I mean, I can already see around the actual machine stitch there are some little puckered bits there. I'm already making my peace with it, but I think I will have to try and be relatively upstanding, and if it really is too bad, then, you know, I'll bite the bullet and do it again. Ow. All right, guys, well, it took one cut thumb, but let's see what we got here. All right, then. Yeah, I mean, pretty poor, to be honest. Although, I mean, these are some pretty, well, that's not great, but some relatively superficial puckers. I'm gonna have to have a think about this. Well, folks, I've made a decision, and the decision is this. Well, first, I need to learn how to say the word decision, but yeah. Again, I think I just put too much ease in this sleeve to begin with. I'll bear that in mind, using this pattern in the future to tweak that, to check that. I was looking again at the other sleeve, which honestly I'm pretty satisfied with, and there are some similar sort of pucker-like things, some little remnants in this sleeve as well, but I find actually that once the sleeve head's in, it kind of deals with a bit of that excess and just holding up the sleeve such that it's not so obvious. And I think I'm just gonna try and embrace it as part of the look. Look, if there are any children watching here, I promise you I'm not advocating giving up and ignoring your problems. I really am not. I'm just advocating for, what is it they say? Accept what you can't change and change what you can't accept. Well, I couldn't accept it, but I also couldn't change it, so I guess I'll have to accept it after all. Anyway, so we're just gonna move on with the further securing of the sleeve. And, you know, very worst case, if I put the sleeve head in, do all these other steps, and I realize, you know what, it's just untenable, I'll just pretend to you guys that I finished it off, and then I'll, you know, undo it all, finish it as homework. But the episode can stand. So I'll just edit that confession out and then maybe overlay a textual explanation of why I have arrived at this particular decision, one that is slightly less heinous. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is just really secure the position of the shoulder pad now. I'm basically basting from the back end of the shoulder pad round to the front notch. So depending on which hand you use, depending on which sleeve you're doing, that would affect the direction, but you want to hold the jacket sort of up so that you're giving it the appropriate shape. And so in this case, starting at the back where the shoulder pad is and just picking up the shoulder pad and the garment fabric, I'm just basting along the sort of inside of the arm seam, picking up one layer or so of the shoulder pad, so not, you know, going through the whole way. This again will come out. This is not the permanent stitch that is going to fix the shoulder pad in place, but as so often with these basting stitches, it's like you need to do one stitch so that you can get everything lined up to do the stitch, the real stitch, the real deal. Yeah, you know what? I'm pretty quickly coming around actually to the sleeve. Again, there's a couple of little puckers as you can see there, although some of them are kind of more like creases that have been left behind from the puckers that the basting stitch created. But actually, because the machine stitch is a couple of millimeters in from where those stitches were, there is no actual true pucker, as it were, coming out of the machine stitch. It's just, as I say, a sort of like remnant crease from the basting there. So at least that's what I'm telling myself. Anyway, okay, so I'm coming now to the front where would my front notch be? I think it's about down there. And eventually I'm going to get past the shoulder pad, and once I do, I'm going to start going through and picking up the lining as well. Yeah, this is a fun time to say that I hit 1,000 subscribers. Isn't that fun? So if you're watching this, I assume you're one of them. Thanks very much for joining the party. If you're not one of them, I'm afraid it's too late. We have a sort of, I think, a 1,200 subscriber limit, and I don't really want to get any more than that. So please do not, under any circumstances, click the subscribe button if you are not subscribed. I'm not a greedy man, as this sleeve proves. So I've now got the jacket turned inside out, and we're going to be doing a lot of work with it turned inside out in the next few steps. Oh, dearie me. So, but we're just securing the lining at the back of the sleeve. So just going through lining and garment fabric. The sleeve is kind of on the inside here, so I'm desperately trying not to hit that. And yeah, just from the sort of underarm seam over to the shoulder seam. And here now I'm getting to the point where the shoulder pad is, so making sure I'm only picking up the shoulder pad once I get there. So obviously you'd want to be making sure that you're not, pulling the back lining too tight or too far over towards the armhole. You would want to make sure you were doing that, wouldn't you, Pat? Have you? You haven't? Oh, interesting. Okay, good to know. Good to know. I think it's probably okay. Okay, so now it's time for the big one, as it were, the stitch to rule them all. So we've got tons of layers here arriving around the armhole, right? We've got the garment fabric itself, so the sleeve and the garment. We've got the canvas, we've got the shoulder pad, we've got the lining. We need to fix them now all into place together. And so with all these layers sort of wadded together in my hand, and again, making sure that the lining is not sort of artificially pulled over. So starting from one bottom end of the shoulder pad and working away around the unshoulder padded part, and from the inside of the sleeve, I am just back stitching within the seam allowance, so about halfway into the seam allowance or so, and going through all of these layers and catching them so that it will just be one fixed edge until I get to the shoulder pad on the other side. Ow. Okay, so in a second we'll be at the shoulder pad coming around the other side, and then it will be time to change tack ever so slightly. Because obviously we're working from the inside out here, and the shoulder pad is currently curved in the opposite direction from what it will actually have. And so if I were to sew it like this, I'd essentially be pulling the shoulder pad out of position that it will need to have once I turn it right sides out. For the next stage, I just need to kind of really make sure that I am turning it to the position that it will have when it's actually turned the right way out. So forcing it as I sew to be in its true curve rather than in the kind of reverse curve that it currently has. I'm not worried about going through to the lining and everything now because that has been fixed at the back with that other base I did there. I'm now just going through, picking up a layer of the shoulder pad, and this will be the stitch that finally kind of locks it in place. And again, this is another great example of one of those stitches where doing it by hand allows you to control the sort of curvature and ensure that it is correct basically and fixed in the right position, I guess is not quite the right word, fixed in the right posture almost. And you can see all that ease there in the sleeve cap. That's the ease that we were talking about. Yeah, now that like 15-20 minutes have passed, I'm already feeling pretty chill about that sleeve. Puckers schmuckers, who cares? Oops, daisy. Yeah, and obviously eventually you will get round to the front panel of the jacket, and you will also be catching the canvas along with the shoulder pad because that's what's there in between. Yes, so the shoulder pad, the canvas edge, everything should be, it's not level with the stitch line, it's level with the edge of the seam allowance, and that helps it when it's turned right side out to kind of push through into the top of the sleeve as well and just add some more of that structure. All right then, so that's that all sorted. So that line, that edge, everything has now kind of been fixed to everything else. It should be nice and firm, but I'll tell you what, it could get firmer. As we can see, we've got some lining excess seam allowance, ease, and so on and so forth sticking out beyond the actual garment seam allowance. I want this now to all just be one coherent edge, and I'm going to trim everything that is sticking out beyond the garment edge. I'm not going to trim this inlay. In my case, it's basically just lining. I'm just going to trim it so that everything is even with the actual garment seam allowance, the sleeve seam allowance. So let's just do that. The one thing I'm not going to trim though is this, because this is inlay that we've added into the side panel that is there for if we ever wanted to let it out at the side. So if I were to trim that now, I would just basically be removing the possibility of ever using this inlay that I so painstakingly added to let out the jacket should I, get absolutely ripped. So yeah, I'm not going to snip that. I'm just going to trim this lining, and you'll see what I mean in a second with the smoothness of that line. But now you can see that is kind of more like one coherent line if you ignore that little flappy bit. But yeah, it certainly feels good to see that edge sort of clean, crisp, and clear. So there's not a ton left to do now. We really are approaching the final stretch. The main thing we do need to add now is this individual, which is the sleeve head. It can vary depending on the style of sleeve being achieved, but typically a suit jacket will have in the top of the sleeve some form of wadding or padding just to help fill out that crown. Yeah, so in my case, I've just gone for, it's a strip of like cotton wadding, so just the kind of thing you would use for padding out like a quilt or something, I don't know. And then this is just a bias cut piece of muslin to go over it. Yeah, I've sort of, as you can see, I've sort of pressed it slightly into a curve, much like I did with the collar in a couple of episodes ago. Now you can also put a bias cut strip of the wool canvas, the interfacing canvas over here as well. I did try that, but I found that because this fabric is relatively light, it showed through too much. You know, it was too stiff basically for the actual garment fabric. So I stripped it down to this, and that seems to have worked pretty well. Yeah, this is basically the length of from the front notch down to about 2 inches or 5 centimeters or so past the back notch. So a good chunk of the sleeve basically is going to be filled out by this. Okay, so we've got our sleeve opening here, and we're going to take the sleeve head and you know, get it in position. The longer rounded edge is sort of flush with the actual sleeve opening itself, so the shorter concave end is actually facing into the sleeve itself. So yeah, lining this up with the front notch, and we're basically just going to hand stitch this, back stitch it into the same seam allowance that we've got here. Basically, I am stitching, in my case, as near to the actual sleeve stitch line as I can manage. And basically, the nearer to the actual sleeve stitch line that you stitch the sleeve head into the seam allowance, the more pronounced, basically, the more full the effect of it will be. What I'm doing is every stitch, I'm just lifting this up and making sure that I'm not within the sleeve seam itself or the sleeves. And you also want to make sure that as much as possible, you're stitching at a consistent distance from the sleeve armhole stitch line. I'm also trying to keep in mind that same point about the curvature of the shoulder pad from earlier, making sure that I'm holding this curve in the proper direction that it will have when it's turned inside out. Ow. Just looking at this, and this is sort of falling about 1 inch short of my front notch, which is there. This is not there, so I guess I'm just gonna have to start again. Okay, so I've just started again from the front notch and I'm working in the other direction. Turns out you can do it this way. Okay, almost there. And I mean, we are honestly now just so close to the jacket just structurally being kind of finished, basically. We're like, I think 1 basting stitch away. Tell me you're not excited. As you can see, that's now sort of like nestled around the inside of the sleeve cap. And the idea is that when we turn it inside out, or rather right side out, that is now filling out and giving shape to that sleeve crown. I'd hoped it would kind of sort of eliminate the visibility of some of this puckering. I feel like it's kind of exacerbated it, if anything, but look, I already made my piece of this hours ago, so I hope you can too. But yeah, look at this sleeve. This sleeve came out a bit better. You can see there the nice effect the sleeve had there. Oh man, that is a bit of a fiasco, isn't it? Well, it's too late to turn back now. Just a quick aside before the literal last stitch. So yeah, I was grumbling a lot about the puckeredness looking of this, and there are, look, if you can see, there are 1 or 2 true pinches and puckers there. I won't deny it, can't deny it. I think it's especially egregious here. There's this little series of bumps. But as I said earlier, I think one thing was the case was actually that some of these marks were not necessarily puckers themselves, but rather the creases left behind from puckers in the basting. So what I've just done is taken my tailor's ham and a press cloth, stuck the tailor's ham inside the sleeve head and just lightly pressed on top of it to try and just get rid of some of those, you know, things that were really just creases rather than puckers themselves. And that's really just helped things to the point where I can, if not in good conscience, then certainly in relative peace, just, you know, accept this for what it is. And yeah, let's do that last stitch. Okay, so all that really needs to happen now before we move to the finishing next week is just for this lining to be, the inner sleeve lining to be pulled through and basted into place. This is pretty straightforward. Bring it over to its relevant edge, fold it round and under like so, and then yeah, just baste around that edge and fix it in place. There will be a little bit of ease, well, much as in the sleeve. I found that it will just sort of find its own way into its place. And the most important thing to note here is to make sure that the seams of both the lining and the garment sleeve are exactly lined up with each other, because otherwise it will be twisted and it won't be very comfortable. You'll just have to do it again. So yeah, just gonna try and anticipate the excess in the sleeve by putting a bit of ease in. And you can see there, that's that stitch I used to join all those layers together in the seam allowance. So this is just gonna cover that. And I'll finish this next week with, you probably guessed it, a slip stitch. Yeah, you could probably press the edge of the sleeve lining if you wanted to make your life a little bit easier. I do like making my life easier as a rule, but if it involves even the slightest bit of extra effort, tend to just give it a miss. And Lord knows, I pay the price often enough. Yeah, mixed bag today. I think I'd hope the sleeves would go better. And I mean, obviously still have this weird nagging feeling of like, oh, why don't you just undo the whole thing and start again? But I'm sure it is possible to get it to go in crease free, pucker free. But there's also an extent to which once I've shrunk away those ripples, the horse has sort of bolted a little bit. Or maybe that's just an excuse I'm using to not correct my mistake. Yeah, again, I mean, with those ripples, those few puckers that I do have, I don't hate them necessarily as like a look. Like, I don't feel like they just spoil it aesthetically. I think it's just more the frustration of that, you know, they're there not by choice, they're there not by the design, they're there by a lack of proficiency on my part, which is totally fine, you know. For the bajillionth time, I am not a professional. I'm doing this for fun. I don't mind the wrinkles. I just mind what they represent about me. Wow, yeah, I mean, look at me putting a damper on what should really be a triumphant moment. This is, as I say, the structural completion of the jacket, more or less. Depends how you feel like buttons and buttonholes, what kind of rank you want to give them. Yeah, folks, look at this. Last few stitches. Wow, what a feeling. I feel totally numb. Let's show you inside. That's the inside. That's the sleeve. That's the outside. That's the sleeve. Guess we better go try it on, hadn't we? Well, let's just dunk on the sleeves first so that we can finish on a high note. Yep, as I said, the left sleeve I'm okay with. I'm pretty happy with that. I think it's hanging nicely as well. The puckers I'm not really seeing much. I'm not really worrying about much. I'm gonna live with it. The right sleeve though, amidst all the other issues, there seems now to be this problem of, it's almost like there's too much length on the sleeve. And so when I sort of pull it up at the top, it kind of smooths out along the arm. That would be how I would want it to appear just normally without having to actually do anything to it. And yeah, I mean, as you can also see here, there's this sort of little flip of just loose garment fabric that isn't really being supported by the sleeve head. I need to fix that one way or another. So I'm gonna go back into the lining there, check the sleeve heads in position as near to that seam as I can get it. But I mean, there's a couple of other things that might be at play. It might be that when I was sewing the sleeve on, I used too little seam allowance, so essentially there's excess fabric sort of on the outside rather than on the inside. Could be that I got a bit confused by the inlay and sewed it basically too near to the edge, essentially kind of lengthening the shoulder seam. That would kind of have the same effect. Yeah, I just need to have a rummage around and work out what specifically the problem is. Maybe it's a mix of all of them, but I'm gonna do that on my own time. I'm gonna do that as homework and get back to you next week in the finishing episode, and I'll explain to you what I've done, how I've done it, and whether it was worth the trouble. But now let's talk about the fun stuff. I mean, look at this. This is a pretty much fully finished suit jacket that I've made to a great degree by hand, and I am pretty over the moon with it, you know. I was feeling pretty bummed out yesterday, slept on it, sun's shining now. It's hard to be too churlish about it just because of a few poxy sleeves. So the fit I'm really pleased with. I actually did take in a touch around the chest, yes, just under the armhole. That's helped precipitate this issue of the sleeve being too big for the armhole, but you know, give and take, you know, swings and roundabouts. Yeah, and I'm happier now with how it fits around the chest. I'm happy pretty much with how it fits everywhere. I think the length is right. I think the collar's good. The shoulders are okay after that whole fiasco a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, I mean, you guys tell me what you think. Have I done an all right job? What would you improve? What would you change? Incidentally, a quick note about the sleeves. I'm sure some of you might be thinking, where's your shirt cuff? We can't see it. Well, firstly, this shirt is actually a little bit too short itself on the sleeves. It's just like a Uniqlo, you know, white dress shirt. And I don't think it's so advisable to judge the jacket sleeve length purely by shirt sleeve length alone, unless you've had a shirt that's been specifically made to be the perfect length in the sleeves, in which case, fair enough. But yeah, I happen to have proportionally quite long arms to my body, and with the first jacket I made, I found that whenever I would move my arms forward, the jacket sleeves would just pull back and expose not just my entire shirt cuff, but you know, where a watch would be if I owned one. So I've tended since then to slightly longer jacket sleeves just so I can move my arms around without feeling as if I'm wearing my younger brother's school uniform. And yeah, I like to think I've hit the right balance of having that sort of security, that extra length that I need to keep everything covered up, but not so much that it's going past down my thumb knuckles and I'm looking like I'm wearing my older brother's school uniform. Anyway, like I say, I don't see why I should let a couple of puckered sleeve caps ruin all my fun. I'm feeling good about this. Let me know what you think. And yeah, I can't wait to really finish this off next week. For now though, obviously, if you're only checking in on the wedding suit journey for the first time, you can find episode 1 here, or indeed if it is already next week, you will find there the final episode, hopefully, of the jacket construction. Otherwise, if watching this has maybe piqued your own interest in sewing, but you just need a little push further, you can go here and hear my 3 reasons why I do it. For now, thanks for watching. Have a good one.